Hello, and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I am your host, as always, Cole Anderson, and today we are adding another piece to my collection of music written by living composers on this channel. So I already have a few things on that playlist. I have Graham Twist's Prelude, as well as Nare Sol's First Tango. Both pieces that were written in the past few years. And now we have another piece written very recently. This was in 2015, written by Saunders. And Sam was a composition and piano student at University of Michigan when I was getting my doctorate there. And one day in the piano forum, he played this piece, and I was absolutely captivated. So it's my very great honor and privilege to be able to present it to you today. Just for context, the piano forum is when all the piano students from all the different teachers' studios would get together to play for each other. So it's an exciting event where we would all get to check in on what was going on with other students that we might not know as well as the students who were in the same studio as ourselves. And Sam was one of these students. He studied with Louis Nagel while I was with Arthur Green. Louis Nagel, by the way, he's since retired, but he still plays concerts, and he's a fabulous pianist and raconteur and a kind of doyen among pianists of his generation. He studied with Rosina Levine, Joseph Rafe, Joseph Bloch, all legendary teachers, and his seminars, which I took several times, were always highly entertaining for the scope of his knowledge and love of music, and he would always just feel free to dive right into either an anecdote or a quotation at the piano. He had a memory that was really astonishingly encyclopedic. If you just mentioned a piece, he would probably go and just start playing it for you. So at that point, I don't think I'd ever heard Sam play the piano for real. I'd kind of heard him when I was walking by in the hall. He was the guy I knew as, the one who was always playing Islamé or the Liszt Sonata or something like that. It was always some super difficult piece that I would hear him launching into from a distance as I was walking by. So on that day, he was slated to play his own composition, which doesn't happen very often. The composer-pianist is a little bit of a rarity, actually, these days, and in the piano forum, you almost never heard composers presenting their own works. In fact, I don't even think I realized that Sam was a composer at that time. It was only when he played this piece that I finally realized. And, Sam, he's a pretty big guy. He's pretty mild-mannered, though. Very gentle and personable, very humble and easy to talk to. So I didn't really expect him to just practically eat the piano alive in his performance, but that's what happened. That had to have been the most inspiring, gripping, awe-inspiring performance I ever heard in that auditorium. It's definitely on my top 10 list of most inspiring performances I've ever heard in my life. It's etched into my memory to this very day. He played like the music was simply a part of him. Well, he wrote it, so I guess that should be right. But it was so effortless. The piano was just totally transcended. Nothing seemed to faze him. And it was so inspiring that afterwards I asked him for the music and said I wanted to play the piece sometime. Well, I got the score, but unfortunately, life got in the way. I had to play doctoral recitals I wasn't able to use his piece for, and after I graduated, I lost track of Sam and his music in the kind of whirl of everyday life, which was fairly chaotic for me for quite some time. But now, after a very long hiatus, I am finally back to play this piece, and let me tell you, it did not disappoint. It's an unusual example for me of a piece that seems just as good now, after I've studied it, as when I first heard it. It's only grown on me over the course of practicing. Sam told me that the impetus for this piece was an injury he received while playing rugby. Apparently he was a bit of a sportsman as well. He got a pretty decent concussion, and he found himself in a very weird state of mind, and this piece came to him at that time. It's a piece that he has said is totally unlike anything else he wrote before or since. I'm also hoping to get a chance to pick Sam's brain a bit more this weekend. We're planning to meet up remotely to chat about this piece and his music and work in general. I'll probably put a teaser up on YouTube and make the full interview available for Patreon members and other financial contributors to the channel, so you can join on Patreon if you are interested in learning more about this piece and the composer. The first thing that struck me about this piece as I practiced it is the pure joy that it takes in rhythm and movement, and it really covers the extremes from great stillness and expansiveness to the most intensely written, complex textures. Although in reality this is a one-movement continuous structure, I do see the outlines of a three-movement structure, fast, slow, fast, in which the last movement clearly recaps the first movement. This is somewhat similar to Schubert's Wanderer Fantasy or Liszt Sonata, although in this case, of course, it's a much more compact form, covering only about 8.5 minutes or so. Motivically speaking, this piece is very tightly worked out, strikingly conceived as well. The opening 40 seconds or so act as a kind of dossier of the complete piece. So first we hear all of the main motives for the entire piece laid out, 5 in number. Then there's a passage which I believe is supposed to foreshadow the second movement, because in the second movement, there's a very contrasting kind of idea. There's a very long, drawn-out melodic ascent to the highest reaches of the piano, and that seems to be foreshadowed here. Finally, there's another short snippet which abruptly shifts meters, and this foreshadows the toccata that occurs in the last movement. After this, we settle into the complete first movement theme, which is followed by a complementary nocturne and waltz combo. And this is actually quite funny to me because I think the idea of having his nocturne kind of morph into a waltz is quite brilliant. It's for me, it seems like an amusing reference to the waltz-like qualities of certain famous Chopin nocturnes. Opus 9, number 2, anybody? So then the first movement, what I've called the first movement, ends, and we move on to the slow movement. And the slow movement is maybe my favorite part. It's incredibly beautiful and a fascinating experiment with form. It starts out sounding like a free improvisation, and there are these little snippets of melody which then are seamlessly integrated into the accompaniment. After some introduction, we settle into what feels like a real melody. It's really unrelated to the 5 main motives from the first movement, and it gradually covers the whole range of the keyboard as it rises upwards and upwards inexorably. As the climax nears, you'll notice that I've marked some motives that Sam has worked into the music that are kind of telling references to the motives from the first movement, just enough to tie the music together without interrupting this inspired kind of improvised trance he's building up. After this build-up in the second movement, there's a short dreamlike chorale at the end which brilliantly references a very similar passage which we have already heard at the end of the waltz. Here they both are side by side. Then abruptly we are thrown into the finale, which starts with this perpetual motion toccata, which still contains as its basis the main theme from the nocturne. So this nocturne idea, it's a falling major seventh. It's the most really obviously melodic idea in the piece, and it really ties everything together. It appears everywhere throughout. The finale develops, the motives in the first movement are transformed, developed, combined with both the toccata and with the nocturne motive. And then there's a climax which recalls the second movement, rising melodic line, and it builds to an ecstatic apotheosis on the first theme idea. The whole structure is so well judged and perfectly executed that I never get tired of hearing it and playing it. So I won't continue to delay your enjoyment of hearing the whole piece. I hope you find as much pleasure from this masterpiece as I have. As always, thank you again to all of my loyal Patreon subscribers, and please do consider becoming a financial supporter of the channel if you haven't already done so, either through Patreon or any of the other methods that I have listed in the description box. Also, if you do want a copy of this piece so that you can perform it or practice it on your own, just let me know and I can send it to you. The composer is graciously making it available free of charge for the moment. So until next time, please enjoy this performance and keep practicing.